All right, we will go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm sure we'll have some more folks trickle in as we get started. So I'm going to just kick things off. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Zeta Ricker. I am the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Policy for the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators. This is the Building Better Brain Injury Medicaid Policies webinar series. This is our second of two webinars, and this webinar is focused on navigating the 1915C public comment period and other legislative opportunities for effective advocacy related to Medicaid specifically. I'm really grateful to be joined by our partners at the Brain Injury Association of America and the Grassroots Project. Denver and I actually had an event earlier today, and so we're lucky to be in person together today and on the same camera. Oh, let's see if I can switch slides here. So I just very briefly talked about our speakers. We're going to actually introduce each of our organizations in the next couple of slides, and we'll have Kate and Denver introduce themselves as they introduce and give more details on their organizations. For those of you who do not know, NASHIA is a nonprofit organization that works to empower state governments and their partners to enhance collaboration and strengthen capabilities to address the needs of people with brain injury and their support systems.
All right, and then with the Brain Injury Association of America, or BIAA, we are the voice of brain injury. We uplift advocates and their complete care system to make sure that we are advancing policy, education, and all support systems to care for our brain injury survivors. So that's research, awareness, treatment, and education advocacy.
And Kate, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Sorry, folks. I promised to be quick with the button, and then I couldn't find it. My name's Kate Brady. I am joining you along with Laura Burness, who is also here and might come on screen to say hi. We both work for the Human Services Research Institute, and we are administering the National Grassroots Project, which is funded by the Administration for Community Living. And I'll look forward to telling you a little bit more about that. If you're not familiar with HSRI, we have been around since the 70s and have staff in, I think, 27 states. Our work is predominantly with community-based and state-level social and human service systems, and our aims are to advance person-driven services by supporting leaders and policymakers and the people they serve to see people living healthy, fulfilling lives as empowered, respected members of society. So that goal that HSRI has aligns with the goals of the Grassroots Project, which are to support the development of disability grassroots advocacy leaders around the country, and also to support new and existing cross-disability coalitions. We've been doing a bit around public commenting, and we'll talk a little more about that shortly. Laura, is there anything you'd like to add? I'm realizing we didn't do visual descriptions. I'm a middle-aged white woman with short light brown hair and glasses in a room with my father's kind of expressionistic paintings behind me, and I've been working in this field about 20 years. Laura?
Sure, I'll just introduce myself briefly. Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Burness. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a white woman in her early 30s with brown hair that's currently tied up in a bun. I'm wearing a light blue shirt with orange and blue earrings, sitting against a red and white chair against a blue wall. I'm the project coordinator for the Grassroots Project. I've been with HSRI since January of this year. My background is twofold. I'm a professional performing artist, and I've worked in the nonprofit space primarily in the arts sector and then in human services sector for over 12 years. I also am someone with lived experience of 2 acquired brain injuries and have been really excited to work on the HCBS aspect of public commenting piece that we've been working on with the Grassroots Project now for the past 9 months. So excited to be here to educate you and to hear the questions that you may have as well.
May I
Fantastic.
add one more little thing, Zeta?
Of course.
On the screen, I hope you're able to access the QR code, which will let you download many of the resources that we're going to discuss today. But if you can't, we'll also make sure that link is in the chat, and we're happy to communicate with you afterwards if that's helpful to get you any resources. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you both so much. Before we move on to our first kind of topic area, everyone who is on the line should be able to comment in the chat, and you should all be able to see everyone's chats. If you have any questions, feel free to put them either in the chat box or in the Q&A section. And if you would tell us who you are and if there's something that you're hoping to get out of today's discussion, we would love to hear that from you before we move on to the next section. Maybe give folks 1 or 2 minutes to share so that we can make sure that we're meeting your goals.
While you do that, do you want us to do visual descriptions?
Oh yeah, good
Please.
idea. Hi everyone, sorry, we should have done this. This is Zeta again. I am a white woman in her early 30s with curly, long blonde hair, and I am sitting on a black chair and have a white background.
And then Denver Supinger, Director of Advocacy and Government Relations for Brain Injury Association of America, 30-year-old, 31-year-old white females, she, her pronouns with curly brown hair, big glasses, against some blinds, which is in the same room as Zeta with the white wall.
And it looks like we're getting some folks say who they are in the chat. Look like we've got some Brain Injury Association folks, case manager.
Oh, hi, Kelly.
Others want to share in the chat. Hi, Patty from the Brain Injury Council of Alaska. All right, well, while folks still can spend some time putting their information in the chat, and it is great to see so many folks. Maybe just one comment to kind of level set, because it is an interesting group that we have here today, and we're really grateful for BIAA and their partnership. I think we really see the opportunity to submit public comments as very vital, and we advocates have a role in that, and advocates can include a wide variety of people. It can be those on the brain injury advisory councils, those from the brain injury associations within each state, others with lived and living experience, and states of course play a really great and important role in either, if they're the ones receiving the public comment, ensuring that they are doing so in a very transparent and thoughtful way. And if you're the agency that maybe isn't the ones receiving comment, supporting advocates. And so our last webinar in the webinar series really talked about some best practices for states, and want to ensure that those state folks online also review that, as well as advocates too. I think there's benefit in everyone reviewing both webinars, and that recording is on our website. So with that, I think Kate is going to kick things off for us.
Great. Thank you, Zeta. And thanks for NASHIA for having us. So we're going to spend just a few minutes talking through the public comment timelines and procedures. Some of this was also presented in the other webinar in more detail. So if you have questions, we're happy to cover those in the chat. We could go to the next slide. Thank you. So we wanted for you to be able to understand the basics of the process and what the requirements are from the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare. So what are their expectations for states that are administering the Medicaid home and community-based services waivers, around which you might give public comment when amendments happen or when waivers are being renewed? This isn't the only context in which you might give a public comment, right? States also present opportunities for comment on their state Medicaid plan. And there are also other opportunities to comment in other policy introductions. So this really pertains specifically to the Medicaid waiver component. But we will talk a little later about some of the best practices for giving public comment. And at that point, I think the application is more broad. So here you'll see CMS requires the updated waivers based on public comment to be made available for review at least 90 days prior to the waiver expiration date. States will submit a draft to CMS at least 120 days before CMS. I'm sorry, at least 100 days before the CMS deadline. So 210 days before the expiration date. So why does this matter? Well, it matters because if you're thinking, oh, my waiver, or the brain injury waiver in my state expires in September, well, almost a full year before that, the state is already in the process of revising and putting out for comment and submitting to CMS, because it cycles twice, right, through CMS. So the state's public input process is required to have at least 2 statements of public notice and public input procedures, meaning they have to tell you how to comment, right? They've got to make it available at least twice on the website, maybe in a press release. And they have to share with you what those procedures will be. So when the public comment period will open, when it will close, and what will happen afterwards. One of the opportunities is required to be virtual. So that could be Teams or Zoom or it could be just an email submission or a form on a website. And at least one has to be non-electronic, meaning there's always an opportunity to go show up in person and speak directly to people who are administering the services. Often that will happen in a room and you'll sign a paper when you get there and your name will be called. And you'll have a finite amount of time, might be 2 to 3 minutes to give a comment, which you can do from your own thoughts, or you can write it up ahead of time and read it. States have to give you, the public, at least 30 days before the deadline to make comments. So that's before the CMS deadline, which means at least 120 days before the expiration date. They could be working on these waivers upwards of 9 months or more prior to the waiver expiration date. So the public comment period could even start 180 days or more prior to the waiver expiration. Another thing that we've noticed is that sometimes you have to go find these details on the state website, and we're certainly available to support you with that, as I know is NASHIA. Let's go to the next slide, please. All right, so quick review of the timeline. The state's gonna, like the sequence of things. The state's gonna announce the waiver and that it's up for renewal or an amendment or a new waiver about 1 year before the current expiration date. Then there's going to be a public comment period around 6 months before the waiver expiration date. Then people will have 30 days to submit those comments. So it's always required to be a 30-day window once the comment period opens. So there's variation in when the comment period will open, but the duration is always 30 days. Once the public comment period closes, states submit the waiver, theoretically, right? They read those comments, they think about how they want to change their plan, they integrate those comments, and they write within their submission how they've considered the comments and what they have changed, if anything. If anything they haven't changed, they say why, and then they submit to CMS. That's about 90 days before the expiration date of the waiver. And then CMS, or Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, they decide, did the state carefully consider the input from the public? Did they make appropriate changes? And then they decide, do we accept this proposed waiver or do we deny it? If they deny it, they call the state up and say what kind of revisions they would like. If they approve it, that approved waiver becomes public and gets put on the website for the public to see. Next slide. Okay, so this is moving to our next section, but before we do so, we have with us an additional expert, which is Laura. Laura has been really supportive of all the coalitions that we're working with, of which there are many, in thinking about how we can support their comment process. So I just want to pause, see if there's anything you want to add there, Laura.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. I think, what we've laid out in those past two slides is a pretty kind of linear, concise timeline. And I think what's important to remember is that pretty much across the board, every single state is going to go through that process differently. For example, I just came across a waiver that expires in June of next year, and their public comment period for that waiver just closed this past month. So really from the year mark of when you see that, okay, this waiver is expiring a year from today, or there's an amendment, that's going to be approved a year from today, it's important to have in place sort of a consistent checking in on that waiver. And to whatever degree as an organization you have that capacity, building in some sort of system of kind of continuous monitoring of the waiver is useful, because you can miss it. And like Kate said, where those comments are posted, where those public notices are posted on a state site, could be in a variety of places, and it's not consistent across states. So some states have it on their blog portion, some have it on a public notice portion of their website, some will put it under news or under press release, some will put it directly on the waiver site that's on their website. And it may be obvious where it is if you do a cursory Google search, but it also may not be obvious, and it may take time to be able to find where that public information is. Obviously, this is also an issue, and this is an area of advocacy as well. So in thinking about the public comment process, you can think about advocacy towards the waiver and in those public comments, but you can also be thinking about how challenging is this process to make the public comment? Is there advocacy that we can do around how this process is being carried out in our state? Because it can get quite challenging if you don't know where to look. And it definitely isn't linear and not consistent. And that requires more labor on behalf of citizens to be able to participate in that public process, which we have the legal right to. So that's just some things to think about when you're thinking about working on that public commenting process.
Hey, and Laura, do you mind if I just jump in as well?
Please, please, please.
Amazing explanation, and I wanted to just share a couple of thoughts. First is that in our work with states, we really try to, again, advocate for the waivers to be transparent in the process. So where you're posting it, actually getting it out to those people with lived and living experience to comment, reaching out to the community to ensure you're getting public comment. And so I absolutely agree with Laura. If that's not happening within your state, that is another avenue for advocacy, and we'd love to help support you in that. The other thing I wanted to share as Laura and Kate, you were talking, is maybe some level setting that we should have done at the beginning, in that there are just under 30, I think, a little bit over, between 20 and 30 brain injury waivers. Some of those are 1915C, and some of those are maybe other waivers that include people with brain injury. And people with brain injury are also served many times under waivers for those with IDD, or those aging and disability waivers. There are sometimes global waivers within each state, community waivers. There are a number of different waivers. And so as you're thinking about tracking, in addition to thinking about the brain injury specific waivers, there are a number of other waivers that are supporting people with brain injury that we'd also recommend that you keep an eye on and think if those are opportunities for public comment. And I'll turn it back over to you now, Kate.
All right, thanks, Seda. All right, so just a few, excuse me, additional thoughts on what constitutes effective and impactful comment submissions. And again, sometimes comments are in person, where you're just talking to a group of folks for a few minutes. Sometimes you're writing up a letter. Sometimes you are writing a comment that many people contribute to because you have collective concerns, either in a group you're already affiliated with, or maybe you're invited to sign on, or maybe you write a comment, you want others to sign on. And sometimes it's just an individual comment that you're submitting about your experience or your thoughts on the waiver itself. So let's go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So strong comments connect your experience to the specifics of the policy, right? Meaning, I really want, for example, I really want to be able to spend a lot of my energy this year on work. And so I want to be able to spend a lot of my waiver budget on supported employment. And I've got a new job, and my new job has a lot of new skills, and I'm going to need a lot of support. But the waiver policy is proposing to only allow me 5 hours of supported employment a month within my budget, and that isn't enough. And it puts me at risk for losing my job. So there's an example of connecting the specific service cap in the waiver to your experience. You can say what is working well, right? Like, I love that I can choose from all these different services. But this cap isn't working because I know I'm not the only one that needs more supported employment. And then you propose the solution, right? I'd like you to raise the cap, or I'd like to be able to spend as much as my budget as I want on this service. Or another category of comments might be, it's really important to me that the people that are approved to provide my personal care services are proficient in certain tasks. And so I want to know that they're all licensed CNAs. And I would like the state, within the context of the waiver, to require this credential for this service. So you can look at the amount of a service, the way a service is defined, and you can also look at what's required as a credential for the people who are allowed to provide that service. And you can speak to those. That said, any comment about your experience with the services, or the services you need but don't have, is completely acceptable and valuable. You can be long and detailed, or you can be brief. You can tell a story or make a request. The state has the responsibility to consider your comment and to figure out what it means for what they should do. You aren't responsible for knowing all that before you give a comment. And so, as I said, you can think about, is there enough of a service? If you think the people doing the services are paid well, so you can also read the waiver and look at, boy, what is the service rate for this, right? If they're paying $12 for physical therapy, maybe that's the reason there are no physical therapists available that are in the Medicaid system, right? So you can look at things like that. You can also look at, if you want to self-direct your services, you can look at whether there are limitations in the waiver around what's approved to be self-directed. And I'm really just giving you a smattering of samples because there are some great resources. In fact, ACL put out a webinar series helping people kind of think about how to move through the waiver. So you'll get those resources as well. And then you can also think about who is eligible for services, right? If you know there's a waiver for aging and disabled people in your state, but the way that your brain injury was evaluated isn't allowing you to qualify for that service, you could say that's a problem. You could say you need to be able to qualify and they should change the eligibility. Anything like that is going to be great. Next slide. I think I'm turning it to you, Zeta. Thanks.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Kate. Kate did a really great job highlighting a number of the different things that you might want to include in your comment, or the different pain points or challenges and solutions that you might want to offer. This is just a page from a recent toolkit that NASHIA put out as part of our work with the Grassroots Project, and it highlights some of the things that we've heard from states that are really kind of best practices in public comment periods. Really ensuring that you fully understand the regulation, read through it carefully, and or the waiver, I should say, in this case, fully understand whatever it is that's being proposed. Read through it carefully, thoroughly identify those potential impacts for you. Share your personal experience, as Kate already shared a really wonderful example. Incorporate data as you can, and kind of combining your personal experience with the data. That could be money saved. It could be number of people that could be impacted by this. There's a number of different data sources. Ensure that you're adhering to any guidelines. And some of these guidelines are more specific to other public comments, not necessarily focused on Medicaid, but sometimes they say there's formatting requirements, or here's how you submit it to. And as Kate suggested, really be specific and offer solutions. And with in particular, fully understanding the regulation and incorporating the data, those are I think things that states and advocates in particular can work together to ensure that that's being done appropriately. I will say this all with a caveat. These are some best practices, but what I think is primarily important is your lived and living experience. So to get people to take action, oftentimes your message needs to touch their hearts through stories and personal experiences, and minds through facts, figures, data, like we've talked about. But remember, your lived experience, however it's expressed, if it's short, if it's long, if it's a personal experience and that's all you share, if it's connected to solutions, no matter how you share it, it is valuable. And so we don't want you to feel pressure to present perfectly or do everything perfectly. Your unique perspective is what the states need to hear. And so that's really what should be your primary focus, while also remembering as you can some of those best practices that might allow the state to listen a little bit better. And of course, we're advocating and sharing with the state the ways in which they should listen to public comments no matter what. I think I'm going to start this. So there are a number of different public comment periods through waivers that we've mentioned, but there's some new ways to impact Medicaid policy that we wanted to share about, and then move into how you can also think about it legislatively. So under the access rule, which is a new regulation put out by CMS, there are a number of different provisions, and what used to be considered their Medicaid Advisory Committee is being transformed a little bit into two different committees. So one is a Beneficiary Advisory Committee, which must be comprised entirely of people who are or have been Medicaid enrollees or family members or caregivers. And then everyone, a certain percentage of those on the Beneficiary Advisory Council will be part of the Medicaid Advisory Committee, which does currently exist, but will be reshaped to be this. So you'll have to have a certain percentage of those back members. And in addition, there will be state or local consumer advocacy groups or other community-based organizations participating Medicaid managed care plans, other state agencies, and a number of others who will all participate on these advisory councils. These are not specific to brain injury, and so it is important to ensure that those with brain injury are able to participate on these advisory committees to impact Medicaid policy across the state. And these two committees will advise the state on a number of things, including additions and changes to covered services, coordination of care, quality of services, the renewal process, cultural competency, access to services, ensuring the final rule is being implemented appropriately in the state. And we understand that CMS is working on some additional guidance on this, and so we'll learn more soon, but do think that there's an opportunity to work now to be prepared to participate in these opportunities as they're formed. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Kate to give some ideas about how you can do that.
Thanks, Ada. So quick plug that we really are excited about the beneficiary advisory councils, and like Seda said, it's going to be so important to, in an early and proactive fashion, reach out to your state administrators, to your state brain injury council, to be sure that people with brain injury are included as representatives on these councils. So you're going to want to stay informed, take note of if there are opportunities for BAC nominations. Those might be much like public comment opportunities. They might be on the state website. And so you're going to want to contact maybe your independent living council or your developmental disabilities council or your brain injury council or all of them to make sure that they're in communication with the state about those nomination periods, because again, these opportunities are available to all people receiving services, and it'll be great to have a diversity of representation there. If you yourself aren't interested in this kind of role, you might think about if there's somebody that you know who uses home and community-based services, who's passionate about advocating for systems improvement, and maybe you would want to nominate them, or maybe you would want to recommend that they nominate themselves. There are some other bits of information and detail, hopefully in a very kind of plain format, in the publication that HSRI produced for the Grassroots Project, which is linked there on the slide and also available on our website. And I'll make sure that link goes in the chat, but it just is an overview of the BACs, so that if you're interested more about what they'll do, you can check that out in addition to these slides. Anything you'd like to add there, Laura?
I would just say that, this is really an amazing opportunity that is now coming into play, and it is an opportunity for people who use HCBS services to be at the table. And I would say that in thinking about, nominating people to be on these committees, or thinking about who in your state would be excellent representatives for your state on these committees to be thinking about, who historically has been represented in these types of situations and which populations in your state are underrepresented or not really represented at all, and what are the kinds of ties you have into those communities to really uplift the advocates who are there who may want to participate, and kind of expanding the ways that you think about the reach and think about who is coming to the table and opening up that space for a more expansive representation in your state on these types of committees, I think is another thing to be thinking about. And from an advocacy perspective too, who can be called in to provide a greater perspective, other types of ideas that maybe haven't come to the table in the state because those people haven't been included before, is another great thing to think about.
Thank you, Laura. And I see in the chat someone's asked for the link to nominate. And I wish that we could share just one link and you could say, this is the state and this is the role I'd like to play. But this is a responsibility that each state Medicaid system has to introduce beneficiary advisory council. So the nominations will appear on your state Medicaid or Home and Community-Based Services website. And I've put the link to the brief there for just an overview on BACs in the chat.
Thank you, Kate, and we will make sure that we share that resource as well in the follow-up materials. This is one of the earlier provisions of the access rule that the states need to implement, but we do know that states are awaiting some additional guidance on these, and so we expect you'll be hearing more from your individual state about how to participate in the coming months. If you are unaware of who your lead state agency on brain injury is, or your brain injury advisory council is, or your brain injury association or affiliate in each state, NASHIA put out a state guide that highlights those differing contacts within each state. That is linked here. I will put it in the chat in a moment as well. And that's another avenue for you to get contact information for folks. So we're going to move into, I think, a conversation about how you can change Medicaid policy through legislation. And just wanted to highlight at the beginning that we really feel strongly that it should be a partnership between states and advocates, and shared this in the last webinar, but wanted you all to hear what we are hoping that states do. We are hoping that states help advocates understand policy options, work together to listen to those with lived experience and develop policy solutions together, creating strategic plans together, and states really providing advocates with the resources and materials that they need to be those boots on the ground and do the actual advocacy, as states are limited in what they're able to advocate for, but they can be great champions internally to help support advocates in making changes outwardly. That can be done in a number of different ways. We've really outlined some of those there, and we've already talked about these in a lot of detail. So with our time, I'm just going to skip this slide, but really encourage you to, again, think about the importance of that partnership.
All right, and then we're going to transition to advocacy, personal power, and coalitions to speak to that change from going through the waiver process to making it a holistic approach at your state level and what you can do. Thank you. Pull this slide. I think you all saw this before. Thank you, Nash and Zeta, for making a beautiful presentation. But this is from a different presentation talking about the new CMS designation of TBI as a chronic condition. Through that, it's a very narrow change. It focuses only on Medicaid Part D plans, And it's only, sorry, Medicare Part D plans, and it's only available if the payer decides and if you're in the location of that plan. But there are existing programs that can come from that through advocacy and through elevating voices like yours. That includes creating brain waivers, brain injury waivers that do not exist, having chronic condition language adopted by your state, expanding waiver access, right? Because we always know there's a dollar amount associated, and in some states there are waiting lists that are as long as can be. This could be making different standards with your board of medicine, social work standards, case management standards to identify brain injury as a chronic condition and have different training provisions and more. So there's so much you can do, which is one change that we might see at CMS beyond the waiver process that we can bring forward. And this is just one highlight with the chronic condition piece. So state government is a mammoth, and as you've heard today, not everything is incredibly transparent. You have to go search and you have to go look. But I want you all to know that your voice is integral in every part of the process. And that includes working through the executive branch, the legislature, and with your state agencies and more. Even though the waiver process might be done a minimum of 90 days before the submission, these conversations are being had every day, everywhere, every day of year. And they're being had by different agencies who may or may not be talking to another, or entities that may or may not be talking to one another. So it's for us to go into that space, shared lived experiences, share realities on the ground, and elevate that. So obviously we have through the state agencies, with agency heads, without going through a legislative process, you can also advocate internally for better education programs, outreach programs, better standards and processes internally, and internal regulations, right? That is something that can be done just through your voice with partnerships with agency heads. And then we also have the executive branch, which has your administration appointees, but also can do things through executive order. And that can include creating new task forces or committees and councils, which are huge, which is the other BAC that you see there. So sorry for the confusion there, but that's boards, advisory councils, and commissions. So each state has a variety of different board advisory councils and commissions within the state that have different jurisdictions. I, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, am blessed to have a milk advisory board, a corn advisory board, but also the board of medicine, and a various advisory boards that regulate respiratory therapist, physical therapist, PCPs as well, right? They have all their own specialties in which they can regulate, look at licensures, standards, accessibilities, cross-state license acceptance, and more through these local councils, which are usually hosted and represented by layist people. So folks in the field, but also they usually have a citizen component to it, where you are a member of the community and you're elevating your concerns as related to whatever the board covers. So this is huge. They have usually at least one meeting a year. Sometimes they meet more regularly, depending on the power and the jurisdiction of the board. But these are the folks that will advise the administration head, who will advise the governor, who then also advises the state legislature on what's happening within that specific field or realm. So there'll be various public testimonies, there'll be hearings, there'll be just overall department updates when it comes to these different regulatory agencies and the boards, advisory councils, and commissions that support it. And that's a great way to get right in front of the folks who have immediate pulse and push on those making changes. These folks usually are political appointees. And I know a lot of us get a little weary when it comes to politics, but we shouldn't, right? These folks are being appointed by either the House Speaker, your governor, other folks within government to be a representation of their office. So this is a great quick point without having to go to your capital to connect with folks who are raising your specific issue in your area. So that's huge for us. And administration appointees also do internal policy. And then we have the legislature, which every state has its own unique ego and process, which is wonderful in its own way. And I wish I can give you a one-on-one depending on where you were. But ultimately, the state has the power to pass legislation and mandates that really impact our community, through programs, through studies to see the general disparities within communities. If your passion is around the housing issue and folks with brain injury, or an issue with reentry populations with brain injury, right? We can push the state to do studies and or put funds and programs into these communities to uplift voices in which other programs like the waiver program might not touch, which is huge for us. And of course, the state has the money. The state legislature holds the purse. So as I alluded to earlier, with waivers, we do unfortunately hit a lot of caps in some states, and just inaccessibility to funds. We know some waivers will offer, $2,500 a year through trust funds, excuse me, that's through a trust fund, which is great, which is something, but we know that might get you a ramp to a home, but nothing else when you're looking at the grand scheme of the services and support a survivor and their care system needs. So money is where it is, and we do have to work through the legislature to make sure we have dedicated budget line items. And that funding is reoccurring and growing every year. And asterisks and joint with the legislature and the executive branch that they are properly applying for all federal grants and assistance as possible. We have some states that refuse to take the second round of COVID funds, which are directly impacting our communities. And that can be easily swayed, or could have been easily swayed, it's too late now, by advocating through that state legislature and executive branch to push them to take those funds to expand programs and support. So there's a large system there, but at the end of the day, it comes to you. Each individual voice is powerful, for no one else really has your experience than you. We are raising awareness, we are creating alliances, we are the force of change in the community. And actually, let's skip to the next slide if we can. Because you are the expert of your lived reality. When you are stepping up to give testimony and giving power to your voice and activating your personal power, you are doing a step that thousands of others are either unable to do or terrified to do. There are other folks who are like, well, someone else will do that for me. Be that person, because we know that one person stepping up is lifting up hundreds of thousands behind them, and ensuring that folks give light to the severity and reality of brain injury and the need for services for our varying ability community. And then this last point here, we live within government systems that were created to uplift various communities in need, but often the government system itself is not representative of that community, right? So they can have the best intentions of the world to create a program that fully supports, the brain injury community. But if they don't have that lived experience, if they're not understanding the disconnection between returning to work, returning to school and play, returning just to a life of dignity and full self-empowerment, or to returning to a new normal for that person, they won't be able to provide the structures and the infrastructure needed to actually support them. They will have to be founding it off of other understandings of varying abilities or their own personal bias. And then lastly, I'm gonna hurry this up. Power of coalition. So I want you all to know that we are not sitting alone. Some of you all are from state agencies. Some of you all are from BIAA state affiliates. I appreciate you all being on, but we are just a blip in the larger scope of things. So we know we're better together. So with this, I would encourage you all, as you're doing even the waiver comment process, is find those inflection points and those commonalities with other disability organizations, parent organizations, school-focused orgs, right? Even trade organizations that are really concerned about their working population and or their entire family structure. And this trade social organizations could include social workers, which is huge for us as well. Social issue organizations, and then also BIAA affiliate. Zeta already provided a quick guide where all that's available, where you can find your BIAA affiliate, but this is direct link as well. We're honored to have been joined under one umbrella with US BIAA. So we're now in nearly all 50 states and have really great programs there within.
Thank you, Denver. And I know, Denver, for your affiliates, you're working on a guide to help with advocacy, right? Do you want to share at all about that?
Yeah. And we understand that advocacy is a bigger question, and folks are like, where do I start, right? How do I empower myself? How do I share my story? What does a meeting look like? Who are the power players? So BIAA is in the process of creating an advocacy 101 toolkit, which breaks down these barriers of understanding to folks so they can figure out, when do I go? When's the best time to go? And who do I talk to when trying to make change in their community?
That is wonderful. I can't wait for affiliates to have that. NASHIA, like we mentioned, through the Grassroots Project, put together a toolkit for Brain Injury Advisory Council members, providers, and others. And I think it really talks about some of the partnership with state agencies and a focus on Brain Injury Advisory Council members and some of the challenges they might face in advocacy. So I think really both of these tools together will be powerful voice and support for advocates, and encourage you to check them both out. I think we're ready to move into our questions. Kate or Laura or Denver, anything else you want to share in the end before we move to questions?
No, nothing from me. Thanks.
No, thank you.
It's great to hear from Denver.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing some in the chat. I saw one question. We are going to share the webinar recording when we are done. Thank you for sharing some of the examples of the back status. Oh yes, I can put the QR code back up. No problem. Actually, yes, actually QR code is the best way to do that right now. Give me a minute. You guys see this? Are there other questions? I can put them in the chat or in the Q&A. That's the one that's been answered. Nope.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing about Massachusetts, and it's closing tomorrow, which is Friday the 25th, if someone's watching this later, or 27th, my goodness. So thank you so much. We got to get those comments in by the deadline.
Any other questions or thoughts from the group? Well, we'll stay on just a couple more minutes in case there are any, but just want to thank you all for joining us, and appreciate the opportunity to share about the importance of advocacy within the waiver process. And hopefully this gave you some tangible tips about how to do that, but we want to continue to be partners to support you throughout this. So please feel free to reach out to any one of us, and we can help to provide guidance along the way. NASHIA is very grateful for our partners at BIAA and the Grassroots Project, and really it's because of their expertise and our partnership that we're able to bring this to you today, and so appreciate you joining. Any other final comments from the group?
Thanks so much for hosting.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it.
Bye.